Paramus is a town in Bergen County, New Jersey. You may think Paramus wasn't important, but it actually takes a big role in the Revolutionary War. Paramus contains a bunch of historical places. Some you might have seen driving down the road, such as the Old Spring Burial Ground, the Red Mill, the George Washington statue, and many more.
Paramus Road was once an Indian trail even before the arrival of the first settlers. Even George Washington was a traveler through Paramus during this time.
The first school was a rough stone building built in 1726, where black and white children learned together. School was very important to farmers. After the first school, many more came.
Imagine Paramus, your hometown. What was it like in 1700s? Well, if I had to guess, I think it would look very proper and genuine. The grist mill, well now called the Red Mill, was built in 1745. This mill was owned by Jacob Zabrski at the time of the Revolutionary War. The Red Mill describes some major events in the Revolutionary War. The term grist is explaining the process of grinding grain into flour. This is one of the main reasons why the grist mill was built. But even though this tower has no Revolutionary War significance today, it still is a very interesting and educational site that is worth taking the time to visit. Earlier, Jacob Zabrski owned this piece of property. Later in his life, he met a man named George Washington. This really helped the milling process improve because he made so many improvements, including the Evans system. The Evans system just helped produce flour a whole lot. Oliver Evans invented this unique but easy system to help not only improve the quantity of flour, but the quality as well. Back in the 1700s, when Aaron Burr was the lawyer, he shared a practice with Alexander Hamilton. Later in the 1700s, Aaron Burr murdered Alexander Hamilton in Weehawken. After all that confusion with Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr entertained at the mill. To conclude, the grist mill was and still is a very educational site. Many people might say that it's a place for goblins, and that the only way the public can release them is by tearing the building down. But if you really want the truth, the grist mill was only used for a couple of purposes, which is a training facility, manufacture, and an entertainment area.
The Old Spring Valley Burial Ground stands strong to this day. This burial ground contains the descendants of early settlers in this area, including 2 local farmers/militiamen of the American Revolution. Their names were Jacob S. Brower and Henry Banta. This cemetery has been around since 1964. The Paramus sorority has sponsored the Old Spring Valley Burial Ground. They still do to this day. Henry Banta, Jacob S. Brower, served in the 22nd Regiment of the Union Army during the Civil War. The cemetery is located in the center of the cemetery has veterans from the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. Militiamen consisted of Jacob S. Brower, Henry Banta, but in the Union Army, both those men and Cornelius Summers have served. The cemetery was in bad shape due to vandalism and dogs that have dug holes into the ground. Most of those tombstones are unreadable, but the Old Spring Valley Burial Ground stands strong to this day.
14,000 men starving and dying from thirst. General Washington then found the springs and held an encampment of 14,000 men there. Howland Avenue divided the farms of Miller Cornelius Van Son and Christian Dieter to the north. Hendrick Banta lived west of Mill Creek, and the Continental Army moved into Bergen County in August 1780 for free. Camped on Kindercamack Ridge. Here, Banta saw General Washington 3 times on his horse. His presence made the area known as Washington Springs. Several times the springs fed brooks that descend the narrow valley between ridges connecting Van Son Park. Jan Banta devised his land to his son Cornelius Banta. During 1780, Continental soldiers encamped in the fields along Kindercamack Road. The commander-in-chief's presence hereabout gave to the name of Washington Spring in Van Son Park.
your way to work. Maybe give it a glance or two when you're bored. But have you ever really thought about the statue inside the George Washington Memorial Park Cemetery? The 9.5-foot tall statue, which is placed on a 3-foot granite base, is more than 3 tons, and is led by first President George Washington. It was designed by Donald Ballou, a sculptor in the early 1900s. He also designed a statue similar to this at Valley Forge. Ballou lived in Middle Township, New Jersey, and was internationally known for his sculptures. He died in 1988 at age 91.
As mentioned before, there was a similar statue built at Valley Forge of George Washington. The winter at Valley Forge was particularly rough for Washington's troops. Disease filled the camps, they were starving and freezing, and their spirits were low. But Washington wanted them to know that he cared, so whenever someone passed at Valley Forge, he would kneel and pray. He did the same for the troops when they moved into Paramus and fought as well.
The cemetery itself was built because so many soldiers died in Paramus on the battleground that is now the George Washington Cemetery. George Washington was a great general who really cared and looked after his troops. And this statue is only one representation of that.
The Terhune Garner House is on Paramus Road. During the Revolutionary War, it was raided 4 separate times by the British Army. The Terhune Garner House was the homestead of David Terhune. David Terhune was a Patriot official who also served as a freeholder from 1779 to 1785. Theodosia Prevost was married to Aaron Burr, who was a soldier in the Revolutionary War. Aaron Burr became the 3rd Vice President of the United States. Theodosia Prevost was highly educated and was an advocate for women's rights. Previous to her marriage with Aaron Burr, she lived in Bergen County with her former husband, James Prevost, and their 5 children. Together, James and Theodosia owned a house called the Hermitage where they once invited George Washington to stay. Washington was also invited to stay at Lydia Watkins, Theodosia's aunt's house. Lydia Watkins also lived in Paramus.